in Worcester County, and I've got some shout outs. I've already given one, and that's to Newt, because hopefully you all either have or will get his report on the illegal gambling that was here, and it's excellent. Also, my go-to lady, Mabel Rogers, who is going to manipulate the PowerPoint presentation that she came into my office and she told me to give her these things and just leave her alone. And she would make it look like I knew what I was doing, so we'll see, Mabel, whether you succeeded.
We'll see.
And I have to say, and I'll try and get through these. Duke tells me I got 40 minutes, so I'll try and get through them. But all of the documents that you're going to see tonight, with the exception of some personal old newspaper articles, came from Tara Downey, who is the assistant curator at the Ocean City Lifesaving Museum. Tara was fantastic. She couldn't do enough, and she also gave me, and what I'm going to do is, because I've got to read some of the newspaper reports, she gave me 36 pages, not of reports, but 36 pages of snippets from reports. There's about 150, I'm not going to read them all, I promise, but about 150 things that I went through to bring you what I hope is a picture of what I call the bad old days. And I also want to say Arlene Advocate, the daughter of Lillian Does, gave that 3-page reminiscence of her mother to the Ocean City Lifesaving Museum. And I called Arlene. Arlene not here, I don't think. She said she probably was not going to come in. But I called her, I said, Arlene, I read your mother's report, and speaking like a lawyer, it's a little benign about what your father and the two Halston brothers, Sam and Irv, were in the bad old days when they came to Ocean City. And I said, I won't mention it if it embarrasses you. And she said, no. She said, I think it was neat, because she said what they did in the beginning allowed them to become what they were. And as we all know, those of us who are familiar with Ocean City, the Halston family became iconic with regard to the Embers Restaurant and other places. So, from 1921 to 1952, gambling was alive and well in Worcester County, and particularly, as we can all imagine, in Ocean City. Now, you have to remember that Prohibition started in 1919, where they outlawed alcoholic beverages, and continued in the law until 1933. So the parameters of most of what I'm going to talk to tonight was during that period of time. So we had gambling, and we had, terrible thing, bootleg whiskey in Worcester County and in Ocean City. And I remember reading a biography of Franklin Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. He was elected in 1932, and Prohibition was rampant. And he called in Harold Ickes, who was his Interior Secretary, and he said, Harold, he said, I think it's time that we have a beer. So he submitted it to the United States Congress, which he owned in those days. They passed the repeal of Prohibition, and the states ratified the repeal of Judge Capitol, I think it was the 19th Amendment or whatever it was, but they repealed Prohibition, so that was over with. Also, of course, we're in the middle of the Great Depression, which really began in earnest with the stock market crash of October 28, 1929, and actually lasted almost to World War II. The Depression became less and less intense, but really it was the economic boom of World War II that alleviated the Depression. So, from 1921 to 1953, when finally illegal gambling was terminated in Worcester County, and we'll get to that. There were 7 state's attorneys in Worcester County and 7 county sheriffs. And they were from 1916 to 1924, William G. Kirby Sr., Charlotte and Billy's grandfather. 1924 to 1927 was Edmund Johnson, who was then appointed the circuit court judge. And then 1927 and 1935, it was Godfrey Child. I remember Judge Child. He was also the state's attorney, tooting a little history here, who prosecuted Orphan Jones, who was the man about whom I wrote the book when he murdered the Green Davis family in 1931. 1935 to 1939 was Tom Johnson. Tom Johnson later became state senator and finally a congressman until he was defeated by Rogers Morton for his seat in Congress. Tom Johnson, who some of us still remember with great fondness, had greatest parties in the world down in South Point. And Tom Johnson, when he was elected state's attorney for Worcester County, by the way, he was the brother of the circuit court judge, so that helped things, but he was the youngest state's attorney in the state of Maryland. He was 24 years old and actually had to pass the bar before he could take office, because when he was elected, he had just graduated from law school. 1939 to 1947 was William G. Kirby Jr., Charlotte and Billy's father. And my memory of Bill Kirby, as a young lawyer, he scared the hell out of me because he had that aura about him of no nonsense. But I remember, and Charlotte and Dale and Billy will remember this, when we had a birthday party for Bill when he was 90 years old. Chief Judge, now Chief Justice he would be called, Bob Bell showed up, claimed that he was the stepson of Bill Kirby, the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals. And I was in a case with Bill. I had represented Ocean Pines at the time, and Bill had a realtor, and I had sued the realtor, and he was defending. And he and I both showed up in Easton in a conference on homeowners associations. And I said, Bill, are you here because of our case? He said, yes. He said, we're in the court a week from Monday, and I'm going to kick your butt. And he was 90 years old. And so we settled the case. There we go. But anyway, after Bill in 1947 came Franklin Upshur, who was a very gentlemanly man who lived in Berlin. And then 1951 to 1955 was John L. Sanford Jr. Now, Mr. Sanford later became state senator, and he served in the state senate until reapportionment with one man, one vote. He did not want to run against Mary Knock because before there was reapportionment, every county in the state, plus Baltimore City, had one senator and 3 members of the House of Delegates. Somerset County had the same number of representatives in the Maryland legislature as Baltimore City, which led H.L. Mencken, who many of you will know, was that iconic Baltimore Sun reporter, to lament in one of his editorials that the vote of one malarial peasant on the lower eastern shore of Maryland was equal to that of 10 Baltimoreans. And the fact is, he was right. We weren't malarial peasants, but we did have the right vote. So, the sheriffs. From 1926 to 1930, it was Walter Dennis. 1930 to 1934, it was Wilmer Purnell. They were Purnells and they're Purnells now. And Wilmer Purnell was the sheriff who saved Orphan Jones' life when he took him out of the Worcester County Jail to prevent him being lynched and took him to Baltimore, where he waited until they hanged him, but they hanged him legally, not he wasn't lynched. Ernest West was there from 34 to 38. William Hall from 38 to 42. Edward Lynch from 1942 to 1946. Arthur Dewar from Snow Hill to 1950, and Ned Lynch, who a lot of us remember as sheriff, 1950 to 1958. So, we're going to get to the photographs before long, because I want to take you on a tour, photographic tour of Ocean City, primarily. But you will see and hear about the following locations in Ocean City where gambling machines were prevalent. Now, when we say gambling machines, and we're going to talk about this one after a while, but many of them were bingo and what they called penny wheels and big wheels, and then of course the erstwhile slot machines that were everywhere. And they were everywhere, including the following. Hotels: George Washington Hotel at 10th Street, Majestic Hotel at 7th Street, the Atlantic Hotel in South Ocean City, the Roadside Hotel, which was near the old bridge down on Worcester Street, African American Hotel, the Inlet Lodge, which of course is still there, the Essex Hotel, the Plimhillin Hotel, the Maryland Inn, the Colonial Hotel, and the Royalton Hotel. That's not a complete list, but those are the ones that you'll see and hear about, because those are the ones that were rated and reported on in these newspaper articles, which I'll summarize. The other boardwalk locations: Rudolph Dolly's, Nathan's Penny Wheel, Rickard's at Wycomico Street, Frank's Place at Worcester Street, Shell's Blocks, and Chip Gordy was so surprised about that, but I told him it's a historic fact. Shell's Block at Division Street, Gadsden's Restaurant, Heyman's Restaurant, the Adelphi Restaurant, which was first in Baltimore Avenue, the Lambros Restaurant, and the Penny Hearts machine, which was run apparently down on the boardwalk by Kurt Does, who was the wife of Lillian Halston Does. And then Kelly's Restaurant, the Regal Restaurant, the Blue Dahlia at 9th Street, the Beach Club at 9th Street, Jackson's Casino, which was one of the heavyweight locations, and we'll talk about this, which came from Jackson's Casino. Townsend's Drugstore. Francis J. Townsend, the father of Frank Townsend, the iconic physician in Ocean City, had a pharmacy and a drugstore, and lo and behold, from time to time, there would be gambling devices there, but Why not? It was everywhere else. Marty's Playland, Rain's Restaurant, Harold Rain on Dorchester Street, Melvin's Steakhouse, the City Lunch, which many of us remember. And then there were the big deal places. Rick's Raft at 17th Street, and many of us remember Rick's Raft. I remember Rick's Raft, and the old heads, Dale Cathell and J.D. Quillen and Mike Quillen and Johnny Lynch. But remember it probably as Rick's Raft, even though they may not admit it, but it was later Josie Maria's Restaurant, which many of us, when we could afford to, went to Josie and Maria's. The Sandbar. The Sandbar was at 33rd Street, a standalone building, which is now, of course, raised, and which is now where the Burger King and the McDonald's are in that block. The Brass Rail at 45th Street. The Lucky Lindy's, and it was also known by the locals as the Pink House. And Lucky Lindy's was kind of the outlier, if you will, as was Rick's Raft, but that's another story that I'll get to. Lucky Lindy's was way up the beach at 47th Street, 2.5 miles north of Ocean City, and was on the east side of the Coastal Highway. Then it was just, of course, the little, excuse me, 2-lane road from Ocean City to Fenwick. And Fish Powell, it's reported in Newt's story. Fish Powell remembered it, and he said that consistently people would get stuck going across the sand dune to get to Lucky Lindy's so that they could have their whiskey and do their gambling. The 21 Club, which I don't have a whole lot of information about because it was 8 miles up the beach, close to Fenwick, but it was there, but not a focal point of the sheriffs and the state's attorneys because they were far out of Ocean City. The personal recollection that I have, Mark Williams was my senior partner, and he died in 1995. And Mark represented a lot of people on the boardwalk. And he had a client on the boardwalk who had one of the facilities that had gambling devices. And he told Mark that, as I recall, Wednesday night was the sheriff's night, and Friday night was the state's attorney's night to come and visit the locations. Now, I'm not talking about Bill Curbin, for the record, but this guy said to Mark, that state's attorney, said, I never liked the son of a bitch. And Mark said, well, what's wrong? He said, when I would hand him his bag full of cash, he never said thank you. But apparently, from time to time, some of the state's attorneys and some of the sheriffs perhaps would partake in a little bit of benign neglect, and that's why the gambling continued. I can tell you, I was astounded when Kara sent me literally dozens and dozens and dozens of reports from the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, the Frederick Times, the Wilmington Journal, the Salisbury Times, talking about raids on gambling in Ocean City. And I came to the conclusion, well, what they would do, they would come in, sometimes they would take the machines, they would arrest the proprietor, the manager, and whoever else was there, and take them to the magistrate, which was Judge Lynch in Ocean City. And he would fine them somewhere between $50, $250, and they would be done. They pleaded guilty, and that was it. And I really came to the conclusion that I think the fines that they were paying became just a cost of business. They were in business, and it was just part of the overhead. But some of the gambling personalities, and they're going to be names that a lot of people are familiar with. Not all of them, but some of them. Sammy Adams was the owner of the Sandbar. Actually, there's an article, he died of a heart attack right at the Sandbar, not during a raid, but he died while he was at work. Charlie Rickards from Bishopville, who was the owner of Rick's Raft, and you'll hear a lot about Rick's Raft in a while. Frank Darrow was the manager of Rick's Raft. Jack Mariana, who worked at Rick's Raft and later had Mario's restaurant. Granville Trimper, Inlet Lodge. Now this is Granville Trimper Sr., who was the brother of Daniel Trimper Sr. Back in the 30s. Not the Granville Trimper that a lot of you may remember, who was his son. Bob Jackson was the owner of Jackson's Casino. Later, many years in the late 50s, was elected Worcester County Commissioner, and was a citizen that everybody knew, Nathan Rappaport. And Nathan Rappaport had Nathan's down on the boardwalk, and it was called the Penny Wheel, and Mildred and I will show you some of this, Mabel and I, I'm sorry Mabel. And the situation was that Nathan, who was I remember him, very elegantly dressed man, always had a white shirt and a tie, and a very tidy apron on when he had the wheel that would give out teddy bears and all that. But apparently the penny wheel didn't always do that. Sometimes in the early days it paid off, and therefore he was charged from time to time. Crawford Savage at the Majestic Hotel. Tom Schill, who was the owner of the Beach Club at 9th Street. John Dale Schau, the owner of Schau's Arcade. As I have said, Francis J. Townsend, father of Dr. Frank Townsend. Kurt Doze, who I've talked about, who had the bingo on the boardwalk at the south end, and also the Blue Dahlia managed and owned at 9th Street. Sam Toston, owner of the Blue Dahlia. Irving Toston, who was also Sam's brother and partner, and of course they later had the Embers restaurant. Brantley Watkins, transforming out of Ocean City. Brantley Watkins was down here in Pocomoke, and Brantley was a big supplier of slot machines and had them on his own property as well. Charles Tillman, the owner of Tilly's Place at Public Landing, which was out on the Public Landing Pier and was raided from time to time with gambling devices. And the big guys, the suppliers, were William Sidney Timmons, Ed Davis, and Elbridge Tillman. And they were the suppliers of the slot machines and the gambling devices. And Ed Davis was one of the big bookie guys who arranged to have all of the racetrack information going to these facilities. So, Mabel, let's do this. Let's start our photographic thing. Now here we have an early view of the south end of the boardwalk, and Mabel has pointed out That's the penny wheel at Nathan's. And then, as you can see, not much of a beach in those days. Boardwalk was up on stilts. I would guess this was in the early 20s. So we can go next.
You might want to point out the carousel, or the merry-go-round.
Oh, yeah. There's the merry-go-round, which is, of course, still there. That's the iconic carousel that was built in the 19th century, I think, in Germany, if I'm not mistaken. Here's another view of the penny wheel. And that, of course, is the lifeguard tower at the end. And I apologize, folks, if I'm in the way. And certainly, if you need to look, please do what you need to do. I'm sorry, but I need to see it too, because maybe. Okay. Here's the blow up, and there's actually the penny wheel. Mabel blew up this old postcard, and there we are. Here's another view of it, and again you can see the beach is, of course, that's where the parking lot is now. This is Dumpsters, by the way, today. That's a Dumpsters building right on the boardwalk. And then here are all the people on the boardwalk. Capitol Theater was there down on Worcester Street. Here's the wheel. This was Nathan's penny wheel, and it's actually at the Lifesaving Museum. And Carol wanted me to bring it. And I said, well, let's take a picture of it because it's as tall as I am, and I didn't want my wife Susan to have to haul it in. So we just took a picture of it instead of bringing it. Now, Ray Shockley and I were talking about this the other day. This is a later morphosis, if that's the right word, of the penny wheel, and it's the Mickey Mouse live mouse races. How many remember the live mouse races? Come on. You guys don't? I do. And they had, Nathan had a little circular track, and he'd be arrested today, I guess, for abuse or whatever, but the little mice would run around, and you would figure out who won, and if the mouse won, then you get a teddy bear. When I was a kid, you didn't get paid off. And Tara said to me, she said, I can't imagine what it would be like to watch mice racing. And I told her, I said, well, if you think that's something, you should have seen their little teeny jockeys. I think she got it as a joke, but I'm not sure. There it is. This is Lucky Lindy's, also known as the Pink House. I remember this building years later when it had been built around and all that. It was an iconic building, and I think it probably was not torn down until sometime in the 70s, but this was way up the beach at 47th Street. Three young ladies enjoying Lucky Lindy's. And that's all Carol would tell me. I don't know whether they were employees or whether they were guests or whatever, but obviously they appeared to be having a good time, and they were at Lucky Lindy's. Here is Tilly's at the Public Landing Pier. Of course, that's all gone now, but that was a big location in the middle of the county when people didn't want to drive up to the north end of the county to find some slot machines. They went to Tilly's, and it was named for the owner, who was Mr. Tillman, who owned Tilly's. Here's Shell's Block. And of course, this is Division Street, and here's the Shell property. And you'll see another view. This is Edwards 5 and 10 cent store and an ice cream machine, or an ice cream location. And then this is the Ocean City Life Saving Museum now. when I was a kid and a lifeguard in the early 60s, this actually was the Ocean City Coast Guard Station. And those of you who remember it, remember they had a duck out front, which was the amphibious wheeled machine that they could drive across the beach and rescue ships or whatever out in the ocean. But this is Shell's block, and Shell's was another target from time to time of the sheriffs and the raids. Here's another. This is Shell's block. There's the bingo that they had. There's Edwards. And this is a, I think that's an ice cream place. And then and I remember at Shell's that they had the bowling alley and they had duck pins instead of 10 pins, and they were the little balls that you had. And of course, Shell's Theater was around behind. So Shell's block was an iconic area. So here's a thing that I found.
Wait a minute.
In my,
I got in a hurry.
the Worcester Sheriff caught bootleggers. And this is Wilmer Colonel again. It's not dated, but I can tell you with Wilmer being in the 20s and early 30s, that's obviously when he caught the bootleggers. Before we go to the next one, Mabel, I want to say, I couldn't find the article where, and I don't know whether it was this one or not, but they seized hundreds, if not thousands, of what they call ham hocks, which were these big packages where they would package the bootleg whiskey in corrugated paper and then wrap them in burlap so that they wouldn't break, and you didn't have to haul them bottle by bottle, and there were 12 bottles in each ham hock. The Worcester County Sheriff, and I wish I had the date, but the Worcester County Sheriff pulled a raid, and a lot of the bootlegging came in on acetate, which of course before the 33 storm, the inlet wasn't there, so it just was an extension south of Ocean City. And the ships would pull in 4 miles off, and then the local waterman would go out, get the bootleg whiskey, bring it in, get paid, and then it would get shipped either to Philadelphia or Baltimore or wherever. And there was a big article, and I could not find it. They locked up, and we'll just say for the argument, 2,000 ham hocks in the Worcester County Jail for safekeeping. And when the federal revenue agents got there the next day, about a third of them were missing. And the sheriff had no idea how someone could get in his locked jail and take away some of this bootleg whiskey. So whether this is that one or not, I don't know. But then we moved to the next one because they caught on. And on this one, it's the Coast Guard. So, spoiling everything, they seized 1,500 cases of liquor down on Assateague, about 2 or 3 miles south of what's now the inlet. And it came off a sailing ship that had come from Canada. And the ship would stay 4 miles offshore so that it was not in the jurisdiction. I think it may have been in, well, I guess it wasn't because it's a 3-mile limit. So they were in international waters. And then the local watermen, who of course were expert people in small boats, would go out and bring in these cases of liquor. And then they stored this one on federal property. Which was at the Life Saving Museum. And it says, part of Ocean City's copious supply of liquor. And you see them, they're piled up there, they look almost like sandbags. They're so piled up. But they were in full view of the federal authorities so that nobody, hopefully, was going to make away with them. And this was December 31st, 1929. The raid was December 30th, and it was obvious that it was headed for somewhere for New Year's, because it was the day before New Year's Eve when they made the raid on the property, on the trucks. So the caravan run with 36 guards is ready for the trek, says the Wilmington Morning News on January 1st. So off it went, and it headed for Baltimore in 11 trucks, by the way. So Baltimore gets it. And as you see, Ocean City whiskey accompanied by customs men. They wanted to make sure that none of the local folks were responsible for it, probably because of the fact that somehow or other they let it slip through their hands. And this was January 2nd, 1930. So then, the next one, they had, in one of the reports in the Wilmington, Delaware Morning News, 33 names of people who were arrested for engaging in the transportation of bootleg. So, because the statute of limitations has run, I will read those names. James Bradford, Elwood Parsons, Norman Lynch, Charlie Powell, Delmer Quillen, and I think he was an EN for the record, not an IN. Yeah.
That's Dennard, by the way.
But I'm not under oath, so I don't know. But anyway, Walter Redden, Levi Cathell, Judge Cathell, Harry Gibbons, Richard Heyman, Harry Powell, and I remember Harry Powell, who ran the hardware store in Burlington. Harris Lynch, I don't know whether he was related to you, Johnny, or not, but we'll stay polite on that. John H. Elliott, Ned Lynch, who was later sheriff of Worcester County, Charles Johnson, George Jones, John E. Quillen, E.R. Elliott, Spencer Elliott, Crawford Savage, the owner of the Majestic Hotel later, Charles Hastings, Joe Bunting, Josh Bunning, Ralph Richardson, Sam Harmon, Alfred Quillen, and Willis Mumford. So, those were the local watermen who were arrested. Now, they were not jailed. They paid fines, and they were released. But, and the only reason that they were even arrested, I suggest, in large part, was because this was a federal operation, not a local operation. So, Coast Guard shifts into Maryland waters in the Frederick, Maryland News, and the reason for that is the Coast Guard was posted in Maryland waters because it was obvious that the local law enforcement were either unable or, for whatever reason, not doing what they thought should be done to halt the import of bootleg liquor. In the meantime, the mayor, who was C.P. Cropper, felt called upon to defend the morals of Ocean City because it got so much bad press. Now notice, this was not, at this point in time, the concentration, at least in the newspapers, was more so on this bootleg operation because it was such a huge thing. But he was defending the morals of Ocean City, saying that people should not take to the idea that Ocean City was a terrible place. And of course, even then, back in 1930s, Ocean City was the Maryland resort. If you didn't go to someplace on Chesapeake Bay, you came to Ocean City. And that's what people were doing. So he was defending the Ocean City morals, even though these reports were in, this is the Baltimore Sun paper, the Evening Sun. This, I just said, the Democratic Messenger that the Kirban family is familiar with, I thought that the headline was neat, and that is 17 slot machines were grabbed, and 11 men were arrested. So it's this continuing raiding of the locations. The Blue Dahlia. And you see this is under the direction of S.D. Toston, that's Sam Toston, and this was at 9th Street, and it said Ocean City's most intimate cocktail lounge. And this was an advertisement for folks to come to the Blue Dahlia, which was a nightclub. I remember it as a kid, and it was a nice location right on 9th Street. And then the next one, Mabel, is another. And this one intrigued me because it said it's open again. What had happened was the Blue Dahlia had been closed down because they snatched all their gambling machines and they had to get replenishment before they opened up again, but they wanted everybody to know that they were ready to go again. And you see down here, the owners are Doe's and Toston, and that's Kurt Doe's, Lillian Toston, Doe's husband, and Sam and Irv Toston. So we're at 9th Street and 10th Street. This is the George Washington Hotel at 10th Street. Here's Jackson's Casino. Beside that is the Ocean Club, who many of us remember. And then this was what we call the Toston Block. They had bingo, the Blue Dahlia, and they had a candy shop, which later, of course, became Candy Kitchen. And behind it, and J.D. Quillen and I were talking about this the other day, behind it, down on 9th Street, kind of tucked away behind the Blue Dahlia, was a little place called the Embers Restaurant. And that was the first Embers in Ocean City, which later became one of the iconic entertainment and dining facilities in the town. So this was a center of activity. In Newt's article, he says that it is reputed that Al Capone had something to do with the funding of the money to build the George Washington Hotel. And that's another part of his statement. Here's another view. This is closer to what I remember when I was a lifeguard. This is looking from south to north. There's the Langford Hotel, which of course is being redeveloped now, and then the location. And here is Jackson's Casino, and behind it, the George Washington. At the top, I remember in high school going to dances at this ballroom at the top of the George Washington, and it was a big deal. Here's the Beach Club. My Uncle Pal Esham was the doorman at the Beach Club, and got to be well known as being the fellow who could determine whether or not you were 21. Behind this is the roof of Jackson's Casino. And here it is. Here's Jackson's, which was a big deal location for entertainment, and not just gambling, but entertainment. And it was a place where you would go and you could enjoy yourself in dancing and dining, and then play some slot machines. And here's the staff at the Jackson's Casino, and you see they're all dressed up. I thought the maitre d' has got white tie and tails, and his hostess has a long dress, and the band is there, and all of the servers. So it was a classy place, no doubt about it. And here's the band in 1937 in Jackson's. And as you can tell, they had a bandstand and a 10 person band, so it was a big deal. And of course, when Prohibition got over with, it had a liquor license, but I thought it was interesting because it only had a beer and light wine license, Class D, signed, of course, by the county commissioners. But it was apparently just beer and wine, not liquor, at least at this time. And there it is. This is the Chuckle-Up machine at Jackson's Casino. And here it is. And this is now in the Life-Saving Museum. And the next one, Mabel, if you'll turn there, we'll show the folks how to play Chuckle-Up. You have your rules of play, and you have the basics, and you either vote or bet on the numbers. You bet over, you bet under, you bet any way you want, and then the triple is that you're going to bet that all of the 3 dice come up with the same number, and because the odds are so incredible on that, if you won, you got 30-to-1 payoff. So it was fantastic. And here's the gentleman with the very same Chuckle-Up machine and his gambling table. So what they would do, you would place your bets, and then when the bets were in, they would toss the dice, and when they rang the bell, you better have your bet down or you didn't get to bet. And this thing weighs about 30 pounds. It's amazing. And that's at the Ocean City Life-Saving Museum. And depending on what time we quit, I'm here and I've got a little green felt and we'll do some business if you want. Just kidding, Sue, I promise. So, okay. These were the other restaurants. The Brass Rail Restaurant was 1.5 miles north of Ocean City, Maryland at 45th Street. And the Brass Rail was, again, a very nice dining facility. It had live Maine lobster, had a large variety of seafood, juicy steaks and fried chicken.
Joe, that's me sitting in the car there.
Beg your pardon?
That's me sitting in the car there. See the kid?
I don't believe that. Is it really?
It is.
Well, I'll be damned. I want your autograph. You were tiny then too, weren't you? Yeah, that's great. So they don't say look for Chip, they say look for Arthur. Who was Arthur?
Arthur was the guy that ran the
This is Arthur?
Yeah, the goat.
Okay. Okay. All right. Now, the next one, this is the Brass Rail. Now, my father would let us go in the Brass Rail when we could afford it. It was a nice restaurant, and it had very nice dining, and as you can see, it's a very classic place. He did let us in there, even though, from time to time, as Mr. Gordy would probably admit, there were some entertainment machines in there located in the proper tucked away places. And you'll see in a moment that
I'm sorry, there it
the
is.
Brass Rail was a lot more popular at night. There's a lot of cars there at night, Chip. And this was either late night dining or entertainment that was there. But it was, seriously, it was a neat place. And I'm not kidding. When Dad could afford it, we go down there for Sunday dinner on more occasions than one. So we were allowed in there. However, and we'll get to these other ones in a minute. This Rick's Raft, 17th Street, as I said, later became Josie and Maria's. And here it is. This is Rick's Raft in the middle of nowhere, it appears to be. However, this is 14th Street. This is a ship's cafe and what is now Harbor Island condominium. And the dock was there. This actually was a landing strip for small private planes who would come into Ocean City. So you can see 17th Street would be right on the north side of this, and there's absolutely nothing there. So we zero in on the next photograph so that you can see it a little better. And here it is, out there by itself, but it was the place. Rick's Raft was a gambling facility. Unlike the other ones, it apparently was just basically a place where you went to try and win money. The Sandbar Lounge, which we'll get to in a minute, and you can go ahead and turn there if you want, maybe. The Sandbar did have shows, Tom Whittington and his restaurant, American and Italian cuisine, and this was at 33rd Street, and there it is. Dad wouldn't let us in the Sandbar either, but it was not as notorious as Rick's Raft, but it still was a frequent visited spot by the sheriff and the state's attorneys. So what I've done is, we've got two updated postcards. This is 33rd Street. This is the Stardust Motel, which Irv Batum built in the 60s. And there is the Sandbar. And as you see, 33rd Street is here. So this is now McDonald's and the, the Burger King or whatever it is. And this was Tiny Abbott's apartments, beachside apartments. And then that was there. And then this, you can see just in dark, was when it was Josie and Maria's. And you can see this is 17th Street, which is now developed. This is the Seascape Motel, the Connor Motel, and Harrison Hall. And then there was that's now the CVS Pharmacy location, of course, but that was Rick's Raft. And just as a personal thing, right off the right side of this was my beach when I was on the Ocean City Beach Patrol from 1959, 1964, and it looked exactly like that back then. And we've come a long way, obviously. This location here is now the Quality Inn Boardwalk, which is 8 stories high. The Colonial Hotel and the Royalton, two respectable hotels. Mabel told me she worked there, right, Mabel? Mm-hmm. And my brother was a bellhop there when it was owned by Jack Harlow from Berlin in the late 50s and early 60s. And the Colonial Hotel was down on the south part of the boardwalk, but they were also locations that were rated, and people went there. Now, I'm running out of time, so I don't want to, I would love to read a lot of these articles, but I've got to stand aside on it, but they are fascinating because time and time and time again, you have these reports of particularly the Rick's Raft, the nightclubs and all that, because those were the large halls, and they were the areas that were being raided. Bill Curbin, State's Attorney Bill Curbin, was, of course, State's Attorney. And I gotta read this simply because it's neat. The youthful, this is 1939, the youthful Worcester County State's Attorney William G. Curbin Jr., who plans to continue his vice campaign during the next 4 years of his term, will likely meet the greatest test for law enforcement in Ocean City as the 1939 season gets underway, observers say. State's Attorney Kirby plans, he says, to nip any evidence of gambling, bootlegging, and grab this, gambling, bootlegging, and Sunday dancing. Charlotte, Billy, what the hell's wrong with Sunday dancing? But well, I guess in Snow Hill, maybe it was different than it was in Ocean City. Ah, okay. But anyway, he was going to crack down on Sunday dancing. Shame on him. And these articles go on and on and on. State's Attorney Kirby said he planned to concentrate his forces upon Ocean City, Maryland, Maryland's only seaside resort, when in the summertime and past seasons, some devices have been popular with summertime visitors. And they have article after article after article. And the interesting thing is, I wish I could read them, but there's too much, but I'll try and do some of them. They have all the names that I read you out before of people who were being arrested and charged, taken to the magistrate, fined, and released. One of the articles, actually Judge Lynch, they confiscated the cash that they got from the location. And Judge Lynch said, you're fined $250. And when they paid the $250, he said, Sheriff, now give them back the cash. So they did. But the articles are replete. But when we come up into the wartime, we have a different situation, of course. And I want to get to one of the articles which said, because I want to get it right, that they confiscated $8,000. And that doesn't sound like much, but when you translate $8,000 in 1942 money into 2023, it is something on the nature of $426,000. So it was a huge situation. Sue and I were talking, and I said, they said one time $200,000 was taken in Ocean City in the summertime. And she said, well, $200,000. But when I translated that into 2023 dollars, it's $43 million in Ocean City. So even though I call it the bad old days, because I have to, being a former law enforcement official in Worcester County, really for most of Ocean City, it was really the good old days. But then comes the cleanup. This picture is of Jack Sanford. He's there. And Elizabeth, his wife, who many of us know. If you didn't know her, you knew her reputation, that's for sure. And this was at a party, which was an anniversary party for Pal and Audrey Esham. And there's so many people there. Over here on the right side, we got Dirk Quillen, Mike and JD's father, and there's their mother, Rhoda. Jack has his arm around two gentlemen. The one on his right that I'm pointing to is Dan Moore, that's my father. And this is Bill Rain. And these were Eshams. My mother was number 11 out of 12 Eshams. So the Eshams were there. This is Everett Esham. This is Lester Esham. And his there they are. Grandkids and great-grandkids are here. And there's, there's Ethel. Yeah. And so all of these people were at this party. This is Tim Rain, the owner of Rain's Reef, Shirley Gillis, the mother of Lee Gillis, the surveyor, and Pug Esham. So he was Pal Esham Jr. But this, I wanted a picture of Jack Sanford, because Jack, and go to the next one, Mabel, where the real thing happens, and that is warning given. Oh, no. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
We'll get there in a minute.
I didn't mean to do that.
No, I did that only for historical notation, but it says, warning given to gambling devices. Jack Sanford, in 1951 and 52, literally wiped out gambling in Worcester County. And he did it. He told me, I was his deputy state's attorney from 1971 to 1978. And he told me, he said, I didn't have to indict one person. He said, because I went to Ed Davis, who was Elizabeth Sanford's brother, who, as you remember, was the big bookie supplier. And he said, I said, Ed, it's over. No more fines, no more magistrates. We're going to the grand jury, and people are going to go to jail. And Jack said that that was all that was needed to get the word out. Now, Judge Prettyman, who was the circuit court judge when I was in the state's attorney's office, told me what he thinks the real story was. He said, now, there were two bosses in the county when I was a young lawyer. Jack Sanford, the state's attorney. He had served 16 years as state's attorney when we get to the election in 1978. And Dan Prettyman, the circuit court judge. Prettyman said, Sanford gets the credit, yes, but I'll tell you the inside story. He said Jack was subpoenaed to the Kefauver Organized Crime Committee in the United States Senate. Senator Kefauver had the crime that they were investigating in Atlantic City, New York City, and they let him know, according to Judge Prettyman, that Ocean City was going to be a target, and if he didn't clean it up, then he was going to be responsible for it. So he did so. Then Dale and I were, Your Honor, Judge Cathell and I were reminiscing about this a while ago. Dale was the city solicitor when Harry Kelly was the mayor of Ocean City, and he and Sanford got into a huge brawl about law enforcement and all that, because Jack had a man who worked for him who was arrested by Ocean City. He turned him loose. Kelly raised hell about it, and they just got into a horrible thing. I was a part-time deputy state's attorney. He was full-time state's attorney because he made it full-time so nobody run against him. And he said, to hell with Ocean City, I'm not prosecuting anything. So here I am. I've been practicing law for 6 years, and I'm trying every case that came out of Ocean City in the circuit court for Worcester County, which is about 80% of the cases. So I put up with that for about a year, and I went to him and I said, Senator Sanford, I said, I want you to retire. I said, I'm trying all these cases and I can't do it. Got a wife who not happy with this in the first place, and I got 2 small kids at home. I gotta have a private practice, and I'm spending all my time prosecuting. Please retire, and I'll run in your place. And he said, no. He said, I'm not gonna let him run me out of office. And I said, all right. I said, in fairness, I'm gonna run against you. So in January of 1978, I resigned as deputy state's attorney, and then we'll briefly go there. Maybe
Oh, I'm
just
sorry,
very
wait a minute,
briefly.
I went the wrong way.
And I beat him. And I beat him not because of me, but because of my father. Dan Moore was a farmer, and he knew every person in Worcester County, and I went to more country stores than I ever knew existed in the county, and I got a lot of votes and won. Now you can move to the next one. because 9 days after I took office, this was 1978, 9 days after I took office as state's attorney in Worcester County, January 3rd, 1979, Jack Sanford was indicted. Now, Jerry Glass was the state prosecutor of Maryland. It was a newly state office where if there was either corruption or some kind of situation where a state's attorney wanted to disqualify themselves, the state prosecutor would take over. Jack Sanford called Jerry Glass when he was still in office, when we were running against each other in the spring of 1978, and said there's corruption in Ocean City. Harry Kelly and Buddy Jenkins have formulated I think, Dale, it was 15-year franchise of the pier, and it's unfair. He shut him out, and it was their relationship. So, Harry Kelly and Buddy Jenkins came down and testified to the grand jury that had been gotten there at the insistence of the state's attorney, John L. Sanford. And I was in there for 11 years altogether. As we all know, grand jury deliberations are secret. But I can tell you what happened without knowing, and I mean that, is that when they testified, they said, well, you need to look at Jack Sanford because he's a full-time state's attorney and he's maintaining a private practice. So the offshot of it was, Jerry Glass called me my first week in office and he said, Jack Sanford's going to be indicted for obstruction of justice and subornation of perjury. Subornation of perjury is when you entice someone to perjure themselves by lying under oath. Jack had Connie Shopley, who had been his secretary in his private practice for 15 years. She was subpoenaed to the grand jury and testified. Now, grand jury are not reported. So what she testified to is nowhere a matter of record, but Jerry Glass secured the indictment of Jack Sanford. So go to the next one. Connie was terribly, understandably upset and emotionally upset with regard to the fact that she may have testified. The obstruction of justice was, he said, so that you're not subpoenaed to the grand jury, go to your father's house, because the sheriff doesn't know where he lives, doesn't know who your father is, so they won't be able to find him. That's obstruction of justice. But if you get there, here's what you tell them, and that's the perjury. So Jack was indicted. Ray Shopley, my law partner, it was Connie's brother-in-law. She came to Ray and she said, I don't know what to do. He said, you hired Chip Gordy. Chip. And you hired Guy Ayers, who was Chip Gordy's partner at the time. And Guy will see what he can do. So Guy had her examined by Dr. Farland in Salisbury, who said she was emotionally unable to testify. The case was removed to Harford County, and Judge Close, Albert Close, said, well, I'm going to have her examined by Jonas Rappaport, the state psychiatrist. Rappaport gave a confidential information to the judge, and the judge said she does not have to testify. So, go to the next one,
That's
Mabel. Nothing left to do. So Jack dodged a bullet, if you will, because without Connie testifying, Gerald Glass had no case. A little bit wimpily, he sent Jerry Reuter, who was his assistant, to say that they couldn't prove the case, so he didn't go himself. But Jerry Glass, and he was a nice person. I liked Jerry, but I told him, I said, you got me in a hell of a mess, because I had made the promise when I ran for state's attorney, I wanted to be a part-time state's attorney, and you're indicted Jack Sanford for doing what I wanted to do, but anyway. Now, the reason that I do this, there's a footnote to illegal gambling, if you'll go to the next one, Mabel, in Worcester County, and that was here. State's attorney questions legality of resort games. Anybody remember this, by the way, except me? Yeah, I'm sitting in my office in the state's attorney's in Snow Hill, and I got a call one day from a woman in Washington, D.C. She said, I've been cheated on your boardwalk. And I said, what do you mean? She said, one of your gambling machines cheated me because I was supposed to get quarters and I got tokens. And I said, madam, we don't have gambling machines on the boardwalk. And I've never forgotten it. She said, when the hell were you on the boardwalk last? So I thought, well, okay. So my investigator, Dexter Ayers, I sent him over to Taylor Bank in Snow Hill to get a $10 roll of quarters, and we visited the boardwalk. And when we got there, my good friend was Eddie Jester, who had one of the Sportland where these machines were. And I said, Eddie, I'm coming to the boardwalk because I hear the gambling machines. He said, no, they're games of skill. And we won't get into legalities, but it was a difference. If it was a game of chance, it was illegal. If it was a game of skill, it wasn't. So I said, well, I'm coming. And I said, I need a representative of the Arcade Association because I'm going to visit every arcade on the boardwalk. He said, well, we got this new kid down here, and we just elected him. He said, he'll meet you up on the boardwalk. So I went up to the pier the next day, and here this 26-year-old skinny kid was there as the president of the Arcade Association of Ocean City, and it was Jim Mathias. So that was the first time. So I said, come on, we're going to go play a gambling machine. So go to the next one. Well, these are just, well, and they, by the way, the first article was in the Washington Post because this lady called them after she called me, and she said, he doesn't even know what the hell's on his boardwalk down there. So I had to do something. No,
Wait a minute, I know, I went the wrong way.
That's all right. So we went to the boardwalk, and I played I had Dexter actually play these machines, and they look like this. They look like, the traditional one-arm bandit with 5 things that come up, but you push the button instead of pulling a lever. And that's what they're doing, they're pushing buttons. So I said to Eddie, I said, yeah, that's a gambling machine. And he said, I know. So he called this guy over, he said, Moose, come here. This guy sat down at the machine, Eddie gave him 5 quarters, and he said to me, what do you want to see Moose get? And I said, okay. So I said, Moose, give me 4 queens. So Moose sits there and he goes bing, 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 and 4 queens come up. And I said, well, give me a straight. So he did. And I said, well, give me a royal straight flush. And he did so. So I thought, if I take this guy with this machine down in Snow Hill, Judge Freeland's going to wonder that I've lost my mind. So this machine made it, but there were other ones, and one on the boardwalk was called the Super Skier. And I mean, it was a spitting image of a gambling device. Now let me say, before anybody gets the wrong impression, His Honor, Rick Dean is here. As we all know, the law has changed because many of these machines that I threw off the boardwalk have come back in their later days. The one that cheated the woman, go to the next one, Mabel, because it was a fascinating
I wanted to question that kid working that machine. I mean, he's got to be very young.
Well, but this was a game of skill, not a game of chance. So I didn't arrest him, for God's sake. But anyway, so they keep going on these things. This is a Baltimore Sun. This thing got legs, and I didn't want to get all this bad press, but because Jack Sanford had cleaned it up, now they're saying I'm the one that's let them come back. So finally, I think it's the next one that has the actual splashdown machine. This is the one that cheated the lady. Now go ahead to the next one.
Oops.
The,
Wow.
some of these, I
Okay.
said.
There we go.
No, keep going. I didn't mean to get all this stuff. Yes, I did, but I don't have time. So, okay. So I had some of them that I had to get them to remove, but we're in August, and they told me that the splashdown machine had cost $16,000. So I said, all right, here's the deal that I'll make with you. I said, you all can have them for the balance of the season, but they need to be gone after Labor Day. And I said, but if you think, because they were telling me, some of them were saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about. We can prove these are games of skill, not games of chance. I said, okay, if you think you can prove it, I will let you sue me in civil court. We'll go into the circuit court for Worcester County and let Judge Prettyman decide whether or not my determination of illegal games, go ahead and, yeah, illegal games are correct or not. And they had a meeting, because one of the guys said he was going to do it. He said, I'll sue him and we'll win. Yeah, keep going, babe. I want to get to that picture and then that last one, and then I'm going to shut up. So they,
Of course.
this is the one that I like, because this is the Salisbury Daily Times. No, go back there where it says they handle it well. Now, the only reason I do that is my own personal statement. I had some of the most scathing editorials written about me, about whether I knew what I was doing and all this kind of stuff. But on this one, I really liked it because they said we handled it well. But what we did was we made a deal. They didn't sue me, and they took the games away, so all's well that ended well. I didn't tell them that I had 2 FBI experts standing by to say that these very same games, and they were manufactured by the Compton Game Company in England, and they said, we have ruled those as illegal gambling devices in many states. So I had the FBI, but they didn't sue me, and that's it. Now, we have said that it's the bad old days, but we're going to go to the last slide, because this is what says it all. In about 2009, Maryland got gambling. So we got the Ocean Downs Casino in fiscal year 2023. And of this money that is made, this $59 million, $3,285,000 goes to local places such as Berlin, Ocean City, Ocean Pines, and of the total income, only 53% is kept by the gambling location. The remainder goes to the state of Maryland in the education fund and that. So the bad old days in Ocean City of illegal gambling have become the good new days for Worcester County. So that's it. And I didn't make it in 40 minutes. I'm sorry, dude, but are there any questions? Yes?
Was there anything you found when you were doing your research about involvement of the churches in Ocean City?
Well, let me say, and I don't want to get into too much detail, there was a time where charitable and religious organizations could have what we call gambling, because it was charity gambling. I was actually the president of the Berlin Lions Club, and we actually shipped down a casino equipment from Delaware and had a gambling night. And I told Jack that I was going to buy all these poker chips. He said, to hell with it. This was when he was still state's attorney. He said, charitable gambling's okay. Just have to play with money. And so we did. So the churches and the charities were excluded out of this. And of course, times have changed from these machines, and I say that in all honesty. Even if we didn't have so-called casino gambling, many of those machines that I said were illegal because of the amorphosis of the law no longer are illegal. Anything else? Okay, well, folks, I've taken up too much time.
That's from the Worcester County Historical Society, the Bob and Kathy Fisher Award for dedication to the preservation of local history. Joseph E. Moore, May 5, 2023. We thank you very much.
Oh my, you're good. Thank you. And let me say, the only reason that I get something like this, except for Dale Cathell, J.D. Quillen, Mike Quillen, I'm the oldest guy left standing. So.
I'll let you know that every time we've asked Joe to participate in his special presentations, he's never denied us once.
Yay.
So let's give him another hand for that. Because that was brilliant.